Hey everyone, my name is TJ Evans, or Timmy Jimmy as they call me over at the Bel Air campus. Well, if you don't know me, I'm one of Mountain's student pastors. Listen, I'm just so glad you're watching this video because that means that you are a part of a small group, and it fills me with so much joy that you chose to spend time with your group tonight. I'm so proud that you decided to tune in digitally. We are really committed to pushing through this current confusion and holding strong together as a community. I'm just so excited to see you all, but I do have a story for you to start. Just last week, I made a meal in the crock pot. How many of you have ever had their parents cook something in the crock pot before? If you're home all day and the food is cooking, man, you just smell it and it smells so good. And that's why I love the crock pot. I was cooking noodles, chicken, and biscuits in a cream sauce, and it cooked all day and it smelled so good. And I could not wait to have it. So after about 6 hours, I finally sat down to eat it. It was awful. It was a pile of mush with way too much salt. Man, I was disappointed. Has anyone else ever been disappointed by something before? Yeah, I think it's safe to say that we've all experienced disappointment in some way. Maybe your disappointment was a little or a lot more serious than my horrible meal. Or maybe it was something small, but it still had an effect on you and how you felt, or maybe even how you viewed your life. It seems that lately in the world, a lot has been changing, and lives are being changed rapidly. In the midst of all this change caused by recent outbreaks of the coronavirus, many people have experienced a lot of disappointment. Trips are canceled, games are canceled, concerts and theater productions are canceled. Maybe you're finally a senior, and now because of everything shutting down, you're missing out on the things that you've been looking forward to for years. Or maybe for others of you, maybe your disappointment is a little different than the results of the recent events. Maybe you tried out for a soccer team, a baseball team, tennis or gymnastics team, and you just didn't make the cut. Or maybe you studied extra hard for multiple hours for a math or a history test, but you ended up failing the test anyway. Or maybe even more, your parents split up some time ago and you have to go back and forth between different homes and different people, and there's just always arguing, and it's just disappointing. All of us have been disappointed at some point. And sometimes that disappointment, it can lead us to question different things, right? I mean, we can start to question whether we're good enough, whether it's worth trying anymore. We start to question if people like us or if we'll ever become something in this world. Or maybe if you're like me, you've been so disappointed that you find yourself questioning God. You find yourself asking questions like, if God really loves me, why would He allow these disappointments to happen in my life? Or when we feel like our disappointments are too much to handle, like we're being crushed by something we can't lift up, or something is holding us underwater, what can we do about that? If Jesus says He came to bring us life and to have it to the full, what do we do with our disappointments? Why does my life feel like the opposite of a full life? Why does it feel like an empty life? These are all valid questions. And we should wrestle with our doubts and disappointments. That's good. So let's take a story of a guy named Joseph from the Bible. A guy whose entire life seemed like a series of disappointments, one after the other. First, we have to go back and we have to understand Joseph's family. God's plan was to choose a nation to show the world the way God wanted them to live. And He chose a man named Abraham to be the first of these people. They came to be known as the Israelites. And even though Abraham and his wife were really old, man, God came through with His promise, and they had a son named Isaac in their old age. Isaac, he went on to have a son named Jacob. And Jacob went on to have 12 sons. That is a lot. And the Bible tells us the favorite of all the sons was the youngest, named Joseph. We read about Joseph in the book of Genesis, and we learn that he was a 17-year-old kid who had dreams, but not normal kinds of dream you may be thinking. One particular dream that he had was that his 11 other brothers, they would bow down to him. And just like you would expect, they got angry. I mean, who watching this is an older or maybe even the oldest sibling? I mean, come on, he was the youngest brother. They weren't gonna take that from him. So in addition to this, Joseph's dad, he gave him a multicolored coat. This is important because in that context, a bright colored coat, it was very valuable. So no wonder his brothers got mad. It's kind of like if your parents were to give your younger brother some new AirPods or a new iPad or a new car, and they give you like, I don't know, an avocado, and of course it's never ripe when you want it to be ripe, but then you turn around, next thing you know it's too ripe and you can't eat it anymore and it just turns into trash, and it's like, what is the point? Okay, anyways, that's not the point. So let's pick up the story in Genesis 37, verses 19 through 24. It says this: "Here comes that dreamer," that's his brothers talking. "They said to each other, 'Come now, let's kill him and throw him into one of these cisterns and say that a ferocious animal devoured him. Then we'll see what comes of his dreams.' When Reuben heard this, one of his brothers, he tried to rescue him from their hands. 'Let's not take his life,' he said. 'Don't shed any blood. Throw him into the cistern here in the desert, but don't lay a hand on him.' Reuben said this to rescue him from them and to take him back to their father. So when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe, the richly ornamented bright robe that was given to him, that he was wearing. And they took him and threw him into the cistern. And now the cistern was empty and there was no water in it." It feels like this is how life treats us sometimes, right? I mean, we're going about minding our own business, and then all of a sudden, boom! Life takes our lunch money, and we're left alone wondering how we can move forward with this disappointment. It can cost us friends, our happiness. Many disappointments in life can cause us to feel like we have no control. And it gets a lot worse for him. As we read on, we see that he gets sold by his own brothers and was shipped away as a slave. The guy just cannot catch a break. He had his father's favor. He had dreams where he was a leader, towering over his brothers, and now he's just sitting in a jail cell on his way to Egypt as a slave. He must have been so disappointed right now. Can anyone relate to Joseph's position? I mean, you saw yourself making the team, didn't you? But now you have to watch from the sidelines. You saw yourself getting the lead, but now you're just in the ensemble. Let's take this to right now. For some of you, you're missing some key parts of your life you thought you'd have. Sports seasons, dances, graduation may seem like it may be delayed or canceled. It's all confusion right now. These moments, they're out of our control, but yet they can have a significant impact on how we live. And it's so disappointing sometimes. Right now, let's continue in Joseph's story because something crazy kind of happens. Jumping over to chapter 39, verses 1 through 6. It says, "Now Joseph had been taken down to Egypt. Potiphar, an Egyptian who was one of Pharaoh's officials, the captain of the guard, he bought him from the Ishmaelites who had taken him there. The Lord was with Joseph, and he prospered, and he lived in the house of his Egyptian master. When his master saw that the Lord was with him and that the Lord gave him success in everything he did, Joseph found favor in his eyes, and he became his attendant. Potiphar, he put him in charge of his household and entrusted to his care everything that he owned. From the time he put him in charge of his household and all that he owned, the Lord blessed the household of the Egyptian because of Joseph. The blessing of the Lord was on everything Potiphar had, both in the house and in the field. So he left in Joseph's care everything he had. With Joseph in charge, he did not concern himself with anything except the food that he ate." See, we all have a choice on how to view our circumstances. First, number one, we can choose to let our circumstances control our view of God. The situation that he finds himself in, Joseph is surrounded by uncertain, unpleasant circumstances. He's in a tough spot that could easily produce some distraught for God or even alter Joseph's view of God if he allows it. Joseph could let his circumstances control his view of God if he only looked at his current circumstances. But our second choice, number two, is this. We can allow God to control our view of our circumstances. For Joseph, he had every right to be disappointed in God, but he chose faith. He chose to trust God, and God followed Joseph into his life, taking what may be evil, what may feel heartless, and instead, God infused those situations with success, favor, promise. God came through for Joseph. Friends, you have a choice on how to respond to disappointments. You can let the circumstances around you control your view of God, or you can let God control your view on the circumstances. So, here are some key takeaways for tonight. Number one, we have to acknowledge our disappointment. It's important for us to name the disappointments and bring them to God. I'm sure there were times that when Joseph was sold into slavery and taken into a foreign land, or maybe sitting in jail, that he was disappointed with the way that things were turning out. And we need to tell God when we're disappointed and allow God the opportunity to shape us. You've already told your group tonight something that's disappointing, but take the time to really dig deeper. Allow your group to hear you. Allow your group to be with you and come around you. Number two, but we can acknowledge our disappointments without letting them hijack our view of God. We can instead let God control our view of our circumstances. Allow God to control your view of your circumstances. You know, we'll continue Joseph's story next week. And if you thought Joseph's story was on the up, well, you're wrong. Because after he gained all this, he was falsely accused and thrown into prison. And hey, just like Netflix does, this is where we're gonna stop in this story for this week. The dude just can't catch a break. Listen, in this world where things are sometimes just out of control, how are you going to respond? Ask yourself that. We don't know what kind of story God is writing in your lives right now, but if you hang on to God, He will reveal it to you. Allow God to control your view on your circumstances. So go spend some time talking about all this in your small groups. We'll see you next week as we wrap up our conversation about disappointment.